Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class, Parashat Nasso and Isru Hag of Mosa'eh Hag Shavuot. And the question today is, what is our perspective to getting to converts? Class is not about the community edict on converts, it's about the Torah's general viewpoint. And I actually start in Parashat Nasso. So there is a very important halakha note made in Parashat Nasso, relevant to Gerim, to converts. And with that, we'll open up and segue into the discussion, which will reflect back on what we just were involved in 12 hours ago. 12 short hours ago was still Hag Shavuot for us. And we're going to try to connect the two. So we're going to open up in Parashat Nasso, the book of Bimidbar, Parashat Nasso, Perek He, chapter 5, and Pasuk He as well. So in this paragraph, the Torah is directing us in the laws of a certain korban, the Ber Bnei Israel, ish isha, ki asu mikol hatot ha'adam, l'm'ol ma'al b'Adonai v'ashema ha'nefesh shahi. A person sins and has a crime to Hashem. Literally, that's what it means, and he's guilty. And it says in Pasuk Zayin, v'hidvadu et hatatam, they have to atone. Asher asu, v'heshiv et Hashemo b'rosho v'hamishito Yosef alav. And this person has to pay back to make up for his crime and add a 20% penalty. V'natan la'asher Hashem lo, and give that to the person that he perpetrated the crime against. Okay, so what law is this referring to? So this is actually referring to a korban that was already presented by the Torah in the book of Vayikra, in Perek He and Vayikra. We know it from the Mishnah, it's called Asham Gezelot. A person steals from somebody else and then denies that he stole from him, and it's swear. This could also take the form of having what's called a pikadon, which is an object, an asset that one is watching and holding and taking responsibility over for somebody else, and then he denies holding it and he swears against that. It could also take the form of a shivuat shekhed, in terms of one owing money to somebody else, and I swear that I don't. Afterwards, he admits his crime and what he has to do. Certainly in the case of taking something from someone else, the Torah says return it. And here is a Torah mandated penalty of 20% that he pays back to the person from whom he stole the object. And he brings a korban asham. It's known as asham gizelot, but as we mentioned, it includes a short list of other type of guilty activities. Okay, so now why is the Torah repeating this law, these set of laws here in Bimidbar, in Parashat Nasso? The reason is for the next pasuk Het. V'im en la'ish goel la'shiva asham elav. Let's say the person from whom you stole, or the other perpetrated the other crimes against, does not have a redeemer, so to speak, which really refers to inheritor, to return this item to, and the 20%. So it says, Ha'asham ha'mushav l'Adonai la'kohen. This object, this money, whatever it is in question, is given back to the Kohen, to the nation of Kohanim. So immediately, the Hachamim ask, and the Rashi brings over here on Pasuk Het, and the question is, is there such thing as a Jew who has no one to redeem for him? In other words, no inheritors, no son, no sister, no brother, no cousin, some type of relative. No such thing in the contents of the Jewish nation, not to have a relative. What the Torah is speaking of is the convert who died. I guess he didn't get married yet, converted to Judaism. He has no official relatives. and then someone stole from him, etc., and then has to return, and he passed away before the person had the chance to redeem himself and pay back to this Geb, the victim from whom he stole. And the Hadush of the Torah is, and this is the entire reason Hakanim tell us why this was repeated here in Parashat Nasso, is that Gezel Hager, after he passes away, goes to the Kohen. That's the Hadush here. So it's very interesting here. What we've just seen is the Torah going out of its way, repeating a law, when really it could have been included, hypothetically, in Vayikra when it was first stated, and inserting an entire paragraph, one book later, of this law in honor of the convert. Honor, and this is not a common occurrence. This is, a possibility. It's one detail in the myriads of details of Torah, Mizvot, and Halachot. And yet the Torah decided to dedicate a whole new paragraph just for the eventuality and the possibility that the ger would be the victim, and shows you how to treat the convert. So I asked, I gave a class on this yesterday in Shavuot, and the question was and is, what is our perspective, the Torah's perspective, to gerim, to converts? The answer is pretty clear. As I mentioned, there are no less than 22 mentionings in the Torah as to how to treat or how not to treat negatively a ger, a convert. And it actually plays out in Mizvot. The first mentioning of this is in Parashat Mishpatim, Perek Kaf Gimal, Pasuk Tet. The Torah commands us, Ger lo tilhas. Don't oppress the ger. V'atem yida'atem, the convert. It can mean stranger, but it really refers to the convert. Atem yida'atem nefesh hager, ki yichlim atem nefesh Yisrael. You know how it feels to be a stranger because that's who you were in Egypt. Later, I'll quote you another one in Parashat Kedoshim. It says, "V'chi aguret techa ger." This is Perek Yotet, Pasuk Lamed Gimal. V'chi aguret techa ger ba'arsechem. Should a convert live amongst you, lo tonu oto. There's an isur from the Torah to say something to cause anguish to the convert. Rather, the next pasuk is "V'ahavta lo kamocha." Love him like yourself. Because you were also strangers in Egypt. You should know how it feels. And so the obvious attitude of the Torah and of the Jewish nation to someone who converted to the Jewish nation is, and this plays out, as I said, in Mizvat Aseh, Mizvat Lo Ta'aseh, negative and positive commandment, is to treat him with compassion and show empathy towards someone who is essentially alone before he built his own family, alone in this nation. And this is because you should know, and here revealed to us one of the many, many objectives of Misraim and the servitude of Yetziat Misraim, because you should be able to relate to such a thing, being people that are oppressed and downtrodden and so subject to other people and so frail and so sensitive. And you should know how to be empathetic to this stranger, to this ger, to this convert. So it seems to be a mitzvah of compassion, which it is. So I ask again, so that really is not my question, because the mitzvah in terms of our treatment to a convert is pretty clear, and its reasons seem pretty straightforward. I'll reframe my question. Do we encourage gerut, conversion? And the answer is simply no, because we know in the laws of gerut that when someone does approach us, the Jewish nation, to convert to Judaism, our first approach is discouragement. There are too many laws. You're going from an easier life. Just keep the 7 mitzvot b'nei Noach, and why put yourself in a position of being guilty and therefore having to absorb the consequences and the punishment for doing the wrong things? Better not. So, as I mentioned, we're not a proselytizing nation. We don't recruit people actively to come to the fold of Judaism. However, they do come. So then let me adjust my question once again. Converts come into our nation. This has happened historically. Is this something that we look at, what we call in halachas b'di'avad? All right, it happened. It happened. All right, now here is a set of laws as to how to treat them. Or is it something that we look at as a great fortune, a great opportunity, something that impacts the Jewish nation very positively, and that we, in retrospect, look at as something that we very much appreciate and embrace in our nation. And so that really brings us to the holiday of Shavuot, what we read the last few days, which is the book of Ruth. And we know that Ruth HaMoabiyah is the first Gioret, female convert on record. Now, this is in the time of Shofetim. This was, hundreds of years after we received the Torah, but still very early in our history. There may have been plenty of other female converts, but this is the one recorded on record in the book of time of Shofetim, in the book of Ruth, that Ruth converted to Judaism. So we know her story. It's a very dramatic, it's a very beautiful story. And, she did it seemingly in a very virtuous way. And in fact, the Zohar compares both Tamar and Ruth together, two people who both lost husbands and pursued another husband simply for the sake of chesed for the deceased, right? And so they're both similar in that way. They're very righteous people. But is that all? Is that all? And we know obviously that is not all. There's a Gemara in Masechet Shabbat that quotes, there's a lot of imagery in Ruth, there's a lot of pesukim that hint and allude to things in the future. The Gemara deals with it in Masechet Shabbat, and Daf Pechet Daf Kuf Yud Gimel rather, quotes the pasuk, and based on Boaz, his instructions, it was handed to Ruth, parched wheat, meaning semi-roasted wheat, and she ate and she was satiated and she had leftover. And there the Gemara speaks about the symbolism of that pasuk. Gemara says, "Votochal," and she ate during the days of David. Votispa, she was satiated in the days of Shlomo HaMelech. Vototar, and she had even left over in the days of Hiskiyahu HaMelech. There's another version of this that say David, Shlomo, Hiskiyahu, and then the last Vototar aligns with Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, who is the author of the Mishnah, and from the lineage of Hillel, who was from the lineage on his mother's side from David HaMelech. And what is this referring to? There are other derashot in this pasuk. Well, simply speaking, the obvious message here is to the historical impact of Ruth, just in terms of lineage. Her descendants were, her great-grandson was David HaMelech, great-great-grandson is Shlomo HaMelech. She is one of the mothers, the matriarchs of the Davidic dynasty of kings, which goes all the way down through all the kings of Yehudah. And as I mentioned, we trace it through the great Tanaim, Hillel, and all his descendants, all the way to the Yehudah Nasi, all the great leaders of the Jewish nation from Ruth. So that is almost like an unintended impact on our nation. But I believe that it's alluding to a lot more and another dimension of impact that Ruth had on the Jewish nation. There's another Gemara in Baba Batra, which is really a takeoff on this discussion. And it quotes a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim Aleph that refers to the structure of royalty in the king's office, in the king's cabinet during the time of our kings. And there it says, with the king, Gemara is the Gemara's Doresh, Zo Ruth HaMoabiyah. This is Ruth with the king, who saw the actual rule of her great-great-grandson, Shlomo HaMelech. How do we know this? Very simple. The Gemara quotes another pasuk directly from Melachim Aleph, from the rule of Shlomo HaMelech, which says, "Vayasem kiseh le'em HaMelech v'teshev limino," that a throne was put for the mother of the king and sat by him. And the Gemara says that's referring to not the mother, but the great-great-grandmother of Shlomo HaMelech. So Ruth was blessed with longer years, and she got to sit on the side right next to the throne of Shlomo HaMelech. Now, what in the world is this old lady doing sitting there? This is Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest man of all time, and yet there she is, having not just the descendants from her, these great rulers of Am Yisrael and royalty, but having actually seemingly impact on the lives of great figures like David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech. And so I wanted to just speak a little in the extension of Ruth about other converts in our history. So we know much later in history, we have some of the Hachamim in the time period called Tanaim, Unkelus Hager, what we read when we Shnai Mikra V'Ha Targum, the Aramaic explanation of the Torah right there on the side of most Chumashim, Unkelus was a convert himself. We choose to read from his Perush Torah every single week. We know that Shemaiah v'Avtalyon, mentioned in the first chapter of Pirkei Avot, who were leaders of their generation. One was the Abedin and one was the Nasi, were converts. And they were the rabbis of none other than the famous and great Hillel and Shammai. They themselves were converts. And we know some of our other great leaders. Rabbi Akiba he's a descendant of converts, as was, we're told, Rabbi Meir, from a Roman general, the great Rabbi Meir. And what do we know? We know a lot about Rabbi Meir. We know a lot about Rabbi Akiba. We also know a lot about Rabbi Meir. He was very much a Renaissance man. And there are stories that show that Rabbi Meir was such an out-of-the-box thinker and actor and did things that no one else would do. Among the Hakamim of Israel, Hakamim raised an eyebrow to some of the things that he did. Once, to save another Jew, he dressed up as a harlot and went to the house of ill repute. Right? What a Hakam would do such a thing? We know that his rabbi, Elisha ben Abuya, that went, so to speak, off the derech and lost his observance of Judaism. He was a great Hakam, and maybe even his faith in God to some extent, that Rabbi Meir continued to learn with him and study with him. And he said, I'm able to take off the peel and take from the pulp. In other words, I can filter out what's wrong about this person and just gain from his chokhmah. And as I mentioned yesterday, there was an incredible midrash where it was on Shabbat, and Elisha ben Abuya is riding a horse, Mehalel Shabbat. And the Rabbi Meir is escorting him and walking next to him. And they're talking Torah, exchanging back and forth. The Rabbi Meir, in some of his questions, is trying to allude to Elisha ben Abuya, his former rabbi, is to possibly, make teshubah. And at one point, Elisha ben Abuya tells Rabbi Meir, Hazor becha, move back. He says, why? He says, Ad kan tehom Shabbat, famous words. Here is the boundary of the border of how far you can walk and not walk past on Shabbat. And Rabbi Meir says, how in the world do you know that? He says, well, I've been counting the steps of the horse, 2,000 amot, to know that this is where it is. Hazor becha, go back. So Rabbi Meir tells him, his former rabbi, Atah hazor becha, you go back, you make teshubah. And he goes on to make excuses, saying he heard about Kol from Shamayim, saying that everyone can return to Judaism besides Elisha ben Abuya. In any case, it says that Rabbi Meir sort of got to him, and right before he died, when he asked him to make teshubah, he cried. Elisha ben Abuya cried, and Rabbi Meir was happy. He took that as an indication that he repented right before he died. But then after he was buried, it was reported to Rabbi Meir that fire was coming out of the grave of Elisha ben Abuya, and they called him. He said, your rabbi's grave's on fire. And he took a talet, and this is where we come back to the original convert Ruth, the book of Megilat Ruth. And he quoted a pasuk, and he says to this grave on fire, after he's put his talet over, Lini po halayla. This is what Boaz told Ruth, of course. This is a play on words. Sleep here overnight. Im yichalech tov yichal. Im yichalech tov. Tov is God. If God redeems you, fine. If God finds a way that you make the world to come, fine. And if not, the imlo, he says, then yichalech anochi hay Adonai. Lini ad haboker. Then I will redeem you in the name of God. I will make sure that you make it to the world to come. I'll make sure. These are bold words. These are out of the box, completely off the chart behavior that we see demonstrated from the Rabbi Meir. But this is typical of the way we have seen in history Gerim act, that come into the fold of our nation, not as an excuse me, but as people with great impact. And why is that? And I'll tell you why. And with this, I'll answer my question and end. Because the first Ger, the real first Ger on record, is who? is the father-in-law of Moshe Rabbeinu, is Yitro. And Yitro, after Matan Torah, witnessed Moshe Rabbeinu toiling and waiting on the nation night and day, and dealing with all their problems. And he came with a suggestion of a judicial system. And Hashem says, great idea. And they adopted it. And the question is, of course, are you kidding? Moshe Rabbeinu just spoke to God on Har Sinai. We have these other prophets, these Yechanim, Aharon, great people. No one could have thought of this. We needed you to think of it. And the answer is absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Because no one saw, as we are in it, we're in the game. We're in the game of Judaism and commitment to Torah in our nation with our heads down. No one had that broad perspective, that outsider's perspective that Yitro had, and was able to see things in an absolute different light from a different angle. And so Yitro had a vision of here what became a critical aspect of Jewish life in Torah that no one else saw because of his unique perspective on things, because of the broad context. Yitro came from another world. Yitro saw things and experiencing things that no observant Jew would ever. And because of that different world, he was able to inculcate his worldview in a positive way and synthesize it with a Torah view and come up with this incredible perspective, so much so that when he wanted to return to his nation, his country, of course, as a Jew, Moshe Rabbeinu was practically begging his father-in-law, and he told him, Al na ta'azov otanu, don't leave us, please. And they exchanged words back and forth, and he told him, Moshe to Yitro, Vahita lanu le'anayim, you'll be eyes for us. We don't have eyes like you have. We don't have the perspective like you have. You're a Gad, you're a convert. You come with a broader perspective on a different, bigger picture that we can't offer. And so he, again, the first one on record, was the advisor for Moshe Rabbeinu. And the first female Gioret on record was the advisor to the wisest man of all time, Shlomo HaMelech, sat root next to him and giving him advice. And throughout history, some of the great Renaissance men, some of the great impactors on the Jewish nation, some of the great Hachamim who were able to perhaps do the outlandish, but only because they understood that that was the right thing to do, were Gerim, were converts. And so we find that not only does the Torah charge and direct us to be compassionate and empathetic towards converts, but in retrospect, in history, although we didn't recruit them, when some of these great men and women did convert to Judaism and did become part of our nation, they are irreplaceable, absolutely irreplaceable. And they became some of the leaders and some of the foundational figures in the long, great history of the Jewish people. So much so that we anticipate our future Melech HaMashiach from the descendancy, from the lineage of David HaMelech, was originally from the descendancy of Ruth HaMoaviyah, will actually come from one of the original converts in Jewish history. Baruch Adonai Olam, Amen v'Amen. Shabbat Shalom.